Hey, what's up there, Hexers? This is Function here. I've got another deck tech video for you. It's been a little while since I put out a deck tech video. I think it's been 2 or 3 weeks, so I figured that'd be something fun to do. I do have to say before I get into it, though, I'm sorry I wasn't able to put anything out over the weekend or earlier in the week. I've just been really busy at work. It's been absolutely crazy, and it was the holiday weekend too, so you gotta give me a little bit of slack there. I promise to get another What's the Pick video in pretty soon. Probably not till next week, but I've got some good stuff on the pipeline for us. Keep the stuff rolling. And on that note, let's get started with the video. So what are we doing today? Like I said, we're doing a deck tech. This is going to be Inspire based human deck. That's kind of the human mechanic, is that a lot of them have Inspire, and the way Inspire works is as another troop with cost greater than or equal to insert card name, it gains blank. So in Princess Victoria's case, we'll use her as an example. Hers is Inspire. As another troop with cost equal to or greater than Victoria's cost enters play under your control, it gets permanent life drain. I think that's pretty straightforward, especially because she has that -3 cost if she's in your hand. She could potentially give everybody life drain as they come into play. She also has it herself. And one thing I do think is kind of funny is the card name is Princess Victoria, but on the card text it references her as just Victoria. I do like it like that. You're not used to seeing it kind of in other card games. Usually it references the full name of the card on the text, which is always kind of awkward. It just takes up unnecessary space, I feel like. So reading it like this is a little easier for me, at least. Alright, so before we get into the actual cards, what are we doing resource-wise? Well, we're playing 12 diamond resources, 11 ruby. That's 23 in total. Also, as I've mentioned in previous videos, there is a non-basic resource, which we've kind of seen. It hasn't been completely spoiled yet, but I would expect to also see a diamond/ruby one where it can potentially give you both types of threshold, and in that case obviously that's an automatic insert into this deck, so we'd probably be playing 4 of those and 11 diamond and 8 ruby. We'd be cutting the rubies down because we don't need them quite as much as we need the diamond. There's one double diamond threshold cost card in the deck. Everything else is just single, either single diamond or single ruby. Alright, so before I get into the cards too, there's one last note. I just want to go over some of the goals and just ideas behind the deck. The main thing is to get into the late game / top deck mode where you and your opponent don't have too many cards left in your hand. You're just drawing cards off the top of your deck and trying to draw something that'll end the game quickly. This deck has a few ways of kind of improving the quality of those cards that you're drawing. Also, this card here is kind of our end game, and I'll get into that later. Another big goal with the deck is to make one-to-one trades with troops. Generally, in synergy decks like this one, that's not necessarily what you want to be doing, because that all your troops improve the troops that continue to come out, more or less. If you have fewer in play, you're going to be a little bit behind. But in this particular deck's case, we do want to be making those one-to-one trades where your opponent attacks with the troop, you block with yours, and they both die. When you can do that, you usually are going to want to, especially early on in the game. Maybe not so much later on, but early on, that's definitely going to be what you're going to be wanting to do. One last thing I'll say is on that synergy deck note, this is kind of the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. We are playing some cards that on their own are not particularly good. Also, playing a deck like this where you need the Inspire troops to inspire other guys, that you have a big potential to get completely blown out. Maybe your board gets swept or a critical piece of your deck gets removed. You're going to be in trouble. And sometimes decks like that, you want to stay away from them. Sometimes they're really good. It depends on the metagame. I don't expect this deck to be particularly strong, meaning like I don't expect it to be top tier. It'll still probably be worth playing if it's a deck you find really fun. I'm talking on the competitive edge, but it's not going to probably be the one that's taking down tournaments consistently. Still something fun to look at, and it's an interesting way of looking at a deck. It helps kind of get your mind flowing for maybe deck building in other cases. So what are our 1-drops? We've got 4 copies of each of these 2 cards. First up is Kraken Guard Mariner, and he's a Inspire troop that gives all of the 1 cost and higher, so pretty much everything, except for Princess Victoria, a +0/+1. So he's going to give him more defense. He's going to make your troops stick around a little bit longer, or a little harder to kill maybe. This is one of those troops we were talking about. He's kind of a throwaway troop. You're going to, anytime you can trade, you're just going to auto trade. You're not even going to think about it. He is not really there to get work done or to kill your opponent. He's there to trade, to help you stabilize, and his effect isn't the strongest, but it's at least something. We want a high saturation of inspired troops in our deck, and this is going to help us do that. Next up is burn. Early on in the game, it's really important to keep the board position pretty much even. Having burn is going to help us do that. It's also a 1-to-1 trade. It's not necessarily doing it with troops, but it's still a 1-to-1 trade. If you're able to kill one of your opponent's troops, you're going to be in pretty good shape. Especially because since it's important to have early on, burn actually kills almost all the 1, 2, 3, and 4 drops. There's very few that avoid it. It's kind of amazing that it does kill any of the 4 drops. Maybe it kills half of them, but that's still pretty good that it potentially could. Alright, so what are our 2 drops? Well, we've got Shield Trainer and Ruby Pyromancer. Shield Trainer is another guy that I would say is not particularly strong, but he's going to help us establish that early board position, and Steadfast is going to definitely help us. In his case, he's Inspire, and he grants the troops Steadfast permanently. He's a 2/2 himself, and he has Steadfast himself, and the way that works is when your troops attack, they don't exhaust, so they can continue to block on the next turn, which definitely goes with the trading theme, that you can attack, and if your opponent chooses not to trade or not to block your guys, you're still going to be able to throw your guys away on the next turn if that's what you're aiming to do. It's definitely important to keep that in mind. So in the case of Ruby Pyromancer, she's definitely our better 2-drop. She gives them +1/+0. She's a 2/1 herself, and what's nice about her is she inspires so many of the other cards in their deck. There's very few she doesn't. Really, it's mainly the Mariner and the Victoria if you played her on turn 1. But yeah, the Pyromancer is going to make your guys hit that much harder, and if your opponent is playing higher toughness guys, it's going to be that much more likely you're going to be able to trade once you've played the Pyromancer and continue to play more guys. Alright, so with that aside, we're playing 4 of each of these. Let's get into the 3-drops. So first up is a Protectorate Clergyman. He's just kind of a body. He's just a beater. He's beaten in with those double fisting maces. So what is he? He's a 3/2. His Inspire effect is he gives troops +1/+1 when they come into play. So that's really good. And it's also permanent, which is worth noting. The first Protectorate Clergyman you play isn't going to be the strongest. Maybe you have a Pyromancer or a Mariner in play. He's going to get a little stronger, but each troop you play after you've played this guy is going to be that much bigger. And that's kind of what makes the synergy of the deck work, is giving all your guys in your deck +1/+1 is pretty powerful. And it's definitely something to keep in mind. One other thing I would say here too is if you look really closely, there's a period at the top line. So when they took this picture, when they screen capped it for us, maybe there was more text here originally, or maybe they were about to put something in. Cryptozoic was, I mean. Maybe if I had to guess, it would be really cool if he had Crush. Now that kind of feels like it might not belong in Diamond, but it kind of works with him having those huge maces and crushing faces, it looks like. So if he had Crush, that would be really great. That's just speculation, though. It could have been anything. Who knows? Or maybe there was nothing at all. Maybe that period just made it in there on accident. So there's one of our 3-drops. We're playing 4 of him. Now we've got our utility troops. We have Princess Victoria, who I've already talked about a little bit. Still have some more stuff to say about her. We've also got Lord Alexander. We've got 1 copy of him in the deck. So in Victoria's case, the main text to read here is that if she's in your opening hand, you can reveal her, and if you do, she gets permanent cost -3. So she becomes a 0-cost troop, meaning that you could play her on turn 1 so long as you still meet that diamond threshold. So on turn 1, you can play a diamond resource, play her, and then play the Mariner. You're not going to want to do it the other way around, because since the Mariner's 1 cost, he's not going to buff the Princess, but she'll give him life drain at least, which might not be that important since he's only ever going to have 1 attack. But at least when you're trading with him, or when you're throwing him away or chump blocking with him, he's at least going to gain you that 1 life back, which is nice. I mean, you might as well play him after playing her. There's no reason to do it otherwise. Or the other way around, at least. So she's in there. One thing I would say about both these guys is that they're not strong in multiples. Not only do I expect her to have unique as well as him, because he already has it, but if you have Princess Victoria in play, she's going to kill herself if you put another one in because they're unique. But if you're hypothetically inspiring your troops twice with life drain, it's not going to help you in any way. I don't think that they're going to let it have double life drain, meaning they give twice as much life back. But there's definitely no way that troops are going to have double speed. Speed is that they can attack the turn they come into play. Well, giving that to troops twice in no way helps you. So we're only playing one copy of him. The reason we're playing 4 of her is that she still counts as a 1-drop. She's going to help us get into that game early, in the sense that if she's in your opening hand, she's basically a 1-drop. What's nice still, though, is that if you draw her late, she's going to now be able to be inspired by all the other stuff you're playing. It's definitely good. Lord Alexander, the fact that he can make any of your late cards into speed creatures is really nice. And I'll get into one nice thing about him being a one-of in the deck, is that we're playing these 2 cards. So Blessing of the Fallen, I'll read that first since we're still talking about Lord Alexander, is troops you control are inspired by troops with Inspire in your graveyard as though they were in play. So it doesn't really matter if Lord Alexander was in play or not, so long as he was either in play or in your graveyard, he's going to be able to give all your troops speed, which is definitely something you shouldn't discount. There's definitely a lot of power in that. Being able to all of a sudden sneak in for a lot more damage than your opponent expects is always something that's good. So here's the big tech part of the deck. Really the only reason I did the deck tech in the first place is this right here. Most of it people could just build themselves, but they might not have thought of Secret Laboratory yet. And so the way Secret Laboratory works is it's a 3-cost artifact. It's a little blurry, but it says pay 1 and exhaust it to draw a card, then choose and discard a card. So if you have 1 card in your hand, if you're in that top deck mode and you just drew the top card for the turn, and it's either a resource or a Kraken Guard Mariner and you're in the late game, that's probably not what you want. Now you can throw it away and draw a new card. Also, maybe you start the game with 2 Princess Victorias in your hand. Well, you're probably not going to want to keep them around, especially because if you started the game with both of them in your hand, they're both 0-cost troops and there's absolutely no benefit to keeping them around. You're going to want to throw one of them away, and that'll help you a little bit. So you're throwing troops away, you're putting them into your graveyard, and now since you're doing that, Blessing is also benefiting you. Normally with Secret Lab, you're trying to find like that critical piece to your deck, but the fact that you're getting some benefit out of discarding is the reason I kind of had this whole idea in the first place. I wanted to build a deck with Secret Lab. I wanted to try to utilize the discard aspect of the card. I was kind of looking at Lab and I was saying, hey, I want to build a deck with this. There's definitely potential in a heavy artifact deck where this is just another piece of the machine, but I like that this deck kind of features Lab in it. It does kind of suck if you don't draw either of these cards, then what's your game plan? Yeah, you're going to be a little bit on the weaker side, and that's kind of what I was saying about synergy decks earlier, is that they have the potential to have bad draws, a lot more so than other decks. With Lab, it's going to help you filter out those bad draws, but any synergy deck, if you don't draw the right pieces in the right order at the right time, you might be behind. That's always something to keep in mind with playing a deck like this. So let's talk about the endgame. We have Legionnaire of Gawain, and like I was saying, I have this "it's a trap" comment here. That's kind of what I was talking about just earlier, is there's some kind of traps in a sense with this deck where it might not be as good as you think. In some cases it might be a little bit better, but I want to talk about Legionnaire here. So when this troop enters play, for each card that inspired it, it deals 1 damage to each opposing troop and each champion. It's actually pretty interesting in multiplayer. If you're doing like a 4-player free-for-all, it hits everybody. So, but for one-on-one, that's really what we're talking about here, is the fact that he's a 4/4 body for 5 makes him not that great. If he didn't have any text in the box, we would never be playing this guy. But, at least not in Constructed. But what he does have going for him is the fact that not only does he hit your opponent in the face when he comes into play, he also deals damage to each of their troops. What's really important here is a deck like this, a synergy deck, if it gets swept, if they play Extinction, where it kills all the creatures you have in play, you're going to be really far behind. But since you have Blessing in the deck, you're going to be able to still recover from that. You're still going to be able to draw Legion and then potentially sweep whatever they continue to play and do a lot of damage to them. And if you have Lord Alexander in your deck, well, maybe when Legion comes into play, you had 4 Inspire effects, so he's doing 4 damage to them, and maybe he got buffed a little bit. Maybe there was a Pyromancer and a Clergyman in your graveyard. He's a 6/4 now, and you had Lord Alexander in there too. Well, all of a sudden, just playing this guy did 10 damage to your opponent's face. So that's kind of the dream scenario that maybe turn 7 or 8. That's what happens when you play this guy. We have 4 copies in the deck, and the first one you play probably isn't going to be the strongest. But if the game draws longer and longer, you have potential where you play a Legionnaire and you just straight up win the game. So that's kind of what I was saying about we're trying to stall into that late game top deck scenario where you just play a Legionnaire and he kills the opponent. There's some other bomby creatures, sure, that the dragons, where if they keep hitting your opponent, they'll kill them very quickly. But there's something to be said for a card when it just hits play, it kills your opponent. That's a lot stronger in some cases where you don't need to actually connect. They don't have as much time to react. This deck is going to be weak to counter magic when you're both in top deck mode and they're holding something that cancels out your Legionnaire when you play it. Yeah, you're going to be in trouble, but that's kind of what you expect. So on the It's a Trap scenario, what I'm saying here is that Burn to the Ground should be compared to Legionnaire. Burn to the Ground's always going to be able to consistently do damage to whatever target you want, whereas Legionnaire, you might draw him turn 6 and maybe your Blessing got destroyed and you have no creatures in play. Well, all of a sudden Legionnaire is just a 4/4. It's not going to be able to do the damage straight to your opponent's face like Burn to the Ground would. So that's definitely one of the blowout scenarios. One of the things I want to talk about is that if you're really relying on Blessing and it gets destroyed, you're going to be in trouble. Granted, I don't expect a lot of people to be packing main deck hate for a card that isn't going to be in all decks. So maybe a lot of people won't have Destroy Target constant in their deck, but they'll have it in their sideboard. And that's something to keep in mind. One other thing I want to mention on Legionnaire before I finish up is he's got this little arrow icon. I don't know if that's a mouse or maybe it's just a special icon that means he like wins you the game if you build an awesome deck and your name is Function. Yeah. No, I'm just joking. It was a bad screen cap. Anyways, last tab here is my little raise your weapons / conclusion slide. Yeah, I think it's kind of funny. I just wanted to include a picture of Lady Elizabeth Stewart. So when I was talking earlier in my Diamond Champion breakdown about wanting to build a deck with her, I think this is the deck I was talking about. Every time I see her picture raising her mace up in the air, I think it's so funny. The fact that this chick, the Adamantine Elite that Lady Elizabeth makes, is like snarling at the mace as she is raising it, I think is so funny. And there's an orc in the background yelling, just like there's the orc in the background of the champion video I did. I did not plan for that, but I think it's pretty funny that I just realized that. One other thing I don't even think I mentioned earlier is this is my 3rd time recording this video. Previously, I was almost done, and I got blue screened. I think I need to get new RAM for my computer or something. I think it's starting to go bad, which sucked. But anyhow, here we are. I did mention I wanted to play with the Lady Elizabeth in the deck, or I wanted to build a deck where she was viable. I think this is the deck where she could fit, if she fits anywhere at least. Is you're trying to get value out of that Adamantine Elite. Playing a 3/3 for 5 is not really what you want to be doing. Just like I was saying, the Legionnaire is not particularly good if he didn't have any text. And in this case, the Elite's just like the Legionnaire, but even worse if he didn't have text. But it is extra value. It's a card, it's an extra card in your hand, so you can throw her away with a lab if you're looking for something else in particular. Maybe you're looking for a Clergyman or a Blessing or another lab or a Legionnaire. Now you can throw her away with since you drew her. Also, maybe she gets inspired, and all of a sudden late game, if maybe you've gone through all your Legionnaires or something, you're going to have an extra card that could get inspired by your Clergyman and maybe the Alexander and bash in for a bunch of damage. So that's definitely something good to keep in mind with her. I don't know if she's going to be that great of a champion for us, but at least she does something for the deck, and that's kind of all I was aiming for. Alright, so on the final note, like I mentioned earlier, or I think I did, is that the link to this, the deck list is in the description of the YouTube video, so check that out if you haven't already. Also, check out all the other YouTubers and article writers out there. There's some people putting out some really great content out there. I've read a bunch of it. Some of it's really interesting, stuff I didn't think about. So hope you guys do too. The community is definitely building up, and I'm really excited about this game. Hope you all are too. On that note, less fail, more function.